I have carried supply manifests across 9 systems. I have counted ration crates in the dark of 40 different hangars. I am not a warrior. I want you to understand that before I tell you this, because I am the last creature in the galaxy who should have been standing close enough to see it happen. But I was there. I saw the whole thing, and I have not been able to stop seeing it since. Let me start where the memory starts, not with the duel, with the smell. The calibration ring on Hesperin Station always smelled like hot metal and old sweat, and the faint chemical sweetness of the cooling fluid they pumped through the floor plates. You got used to it. Most of us who worked the lower decks stopped noticing it after a while. But that morning it was stronger because they had run the arena hard the night before and the plates were still ticking as they cooled. That ticking sound, I remember it clear as anything. Tick, 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 like something patient waiting. I was there for a stupid reason. A crate of pressure seals had gone missing from the medical bay, and the quartermaster's log said they'd been logged into the arena stores by mistake. So they sent me. Vosk Turnell, junior clerk, 3rd grade, sent to go dig through a warrior's storeroom for a box of rubber rings. That is the kind of glamour my life had. I remember thinking on the walk over that I would be in and out in 10 minutes. The ring wasn't a stadium the way you might imagine. It was a working facility. Fighters from a dozen species came through to train, to certify, to settle disputes the councils didn't want on the record. There was a real arena at the heart of it, a wide sunken floor of dark gray plating ringed by rising benches, but most of the time it was half empty. Trainers barking, youngsters getting thrown around, the occasional grudge match that drew a crowd. That morning it was not half empty. I noticed the noise before I even got through the corridor. A crowd hum. That low roar that a lot of bodies make when they're all talking at once and all excited about the same thing. I almost turned around. Crowds meant something official was happening, and something official meant I'd have to wait, and I didn't want to wait. I wanted my rubber rings. But the storeroom I needed was on the far side of the arena floor. There was no way around. So I told myself I'd cut across the upper walkway, keep my head down, and slip through. That was my mistake. If I'd gone the long way, I'd have missed it. I'd have a normal life. I'd remember Hesperin Station as the place where I found a box of pressure seals. Instead, I remember it as the place where I learned what humans actually are. Let me tell you about the crowd, because the crowd is part of this. Warriors are a strange breed across every species I've ever met. Doesn't matter if they've got 4 arms or scales or a face like a folded flower. Underneath, they're the same animal. They love strength. They respect it more than anything else in the universe, more than kindness, more than sense, more than their own long-term survival. And they love a spectacle. They love watching 2 of their own kind hit each other until one stops moving. The benches were packed with them. Kruggan mostly, big, plated, that gray-green hide that goes darker when their blood is up. A cluster of Sethari with their long necks and their bored, glittering eyes. A few draymen like me, though we're not fighters, we were probably clerks and techs who'd found an excuse to come watch. And scattered through the crowd in 1s and 2s, other species I couldn't name. They were all facing the arena floor. And on the arena floor, holding court, was the biggest Kruggan I had ever seen. His name, I would learn, was Dreeg Vorhalek, and he wanted everyone to know it. He was pacing the ring the way a predator paces a cage, not nervous, showing off. He had that easy, rolling walk that big fighters get, the kind that says, I have never once in my life worried about being hurt. His plating had the deep polish of somebody who spent real money on grooming. Across his chest, burned into the hide in the old way, were the marks of his kills. Not sparring wins. Kills. He wore them like jewelry. And he was talking. Loud. He had a voice that filled the whole bowl of the arena without seeming to try. And I said to him, if you cannot stand, you cannot fight, and if you cannot fight, why are you wasting the ring's time? A ripple of laughter from the benches. He soaked it up. The problem with this station, he went on, turning slowly so everyone got a look at him, is that they let anyone certify. Anyone. They have lowered the standard so far that I could throw a rock down any corridor and hit 3 so-called warriors who would faint at the sight of their own blood. More laughter. He was good at this. I'll give him that. He knew how to work a room. I stopped on the upper walkway, half against my own will, and watched him for a moment. There's a horrible fascination in watching someone who is that sure of themselves. Part of you wants to see them proven right. Part of you, a meaner part, wants to see them broken. "Where is my opponent?" Drieg called out, spreading his forearms wide. "The council promised me a challenger. I have been standing here warming up on air. Bring me someone, bring me anyone, I am not fussy." And that's when I saw her. She was standing at the edge of the floor near the fighter's gate, and I honestly don't know how long she'd been there. She was small. That was the first thing. Small in the way that made your eye slide right past her, the way you don't notice a tool left on a shelf. A human. I'd seen humans before, of course. By that point they'd been part of the galactic community for, 60 of their years, long enough that they weren't a novelty anymore. You saw them on trade stations, on survey ships, working jobs nobody else wanted in places nobody else would go. They had a reputation, but it was a quiet one. Tough, strange, doesn't know when to quit. The kind of thing you heard in a cargo bay and half believed. This one didn't look tough. She looked like she'd blow over in a strong draft. She wore a plain gray training suit, no marks on it, no rank, no colors. Her hair was cut short and practical. She had a stillness about her that I mistook at first for fear. She stood very straight and very quiet, and she watched Drieg Vorhalic pace and boast, and her face didn't move at all. Not a flinch, not a frown, nothing. Someone in the crowd noticed her before Drieg did. A Kruggan on the front bench pointed and said something to his neighbor, and they both laughed, and the laugh spread, and Drieg turned to see what was funny. He saw her, and his whole face opened up with delight. "This," he said, "this is my challenger." He walked toward her, slow, making a show of it. He circled her the way he'd circled the ring, looking her up and down, and next to him she looked like a child. The top of her head barely reached the middle of his chest. He could have picked her up in one hand. "Little thing," he said, gently, mockingly, the way you'd talk to a pet. "Are you lost? The observation deck is above. This is the fighting floor, fighters only." She looked up at him. She didn't answer. "Can you understand me?" He tapped the translator patch on his own throat, exaggerated like she was slow. "Do you understand?" She kept looking at him, and she said nothing. The crowd loved it. They started laughing harder, and someone shouted something, and Drieg played to them. He turned to the benches, with his arms spread in mock confusion. "She won't talk to me," he announced. "I've finally found an opponent I can't insult because she doesn't understand a word I'm saying." Roars of laughter. He was in his element now. He came back to her and leaned down, close, right into her face. "Go home, little human," he said, and the translator carried it flat and cold across the whole arena. "Go home before you get hurt. I don't fight children, I fight warriors. And you," he straightened up, dismissive, already turning away, "you are not a warrior. You are a mistake the council made on a form." And here's the thing I noticed, standing up there on the walkway with my forgotten box of seals in my head. She hadn't moved. Through all of it, the circling, the mockery. The face pushed right up into hers. She hadn't stepped back. She hadn't dropped her eyes. She hadn't done any of the small, nervous things that every creature does when a bigger creature threatens them. Her hands were loose at her sides. Her breathing, as far as I could see, was slow and even. She just watched him, steady, patient, the way you watch a storm you already know how to survive. And a cold little feeling went up the back of my neck. I didn't understand it yet. I just knew that something about the picture was wrong. The big warrior and the small, silent girl, everyone was reading it one way, and some quiet part of me was starting to read it the other way, and I didn't have the words for why. A referee came out onto the floor. Sethari, one of the neutral ones they used for certification bouts, long-necked and unhurried. It carried the ceremonial baton, and it looked, frankly, like it wanted to be anywhere else. The challenger, it said in that dry Sethari way, declines to speak. Does the challenger wish to withdraw? The human looked at the referee, and slowly, deliberately, she shook her head. Once. The challenger declines to withdraw, the referee announced. There was a note in its voice. I swear there was a note of "Are you certain?" Small one, but Sethari don't editorialize on the record. Then the certification bout will proceed. Standard rules. First to yield or first to incapacitation. Weapons. Drieg laughed. I don't need a weapon for this. The referee turned to the human. Challenger. Weapons. She reached up, unhurried, and unclipped something from the small of her back. I hadn't even seen it there. It was a short bar of dull metal, maybe the length of her forearm, plain, no edge, no glow, nothing that looked dangerous. She held it loosely at her side. The crowd found this even funnier. A club. A little metal club against a Kruggan who wore his kills on his chest. Oh good, Drieg called out, delighted. She brought a stick. The referee looked between them. It hesitated. And then, because rules are rules and it had no grounds to stop it, it stepped back to the edge of the floor and raised the baton. Fighters, to your marks. Drieg didn't bother going to a mark. He just planted himself in the center of the ring, rolled his four shoulders, and grinned down at her. The human walked to her mark, calm steps. She set her feet, she held the little bar low, and she breathed. I was gripping the rail of the walkway. I didn't even notice I was doing it until later when my hands ached. I remember thinking, in that stretched-out moment before the baton fell, this is going to be horrible. This is going to be quick and horrible, and I am going to watch a big fool break a small, brave girl in half, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. That's what I thought. I was half right, it was quick. The baton fell. Drieg moved first because of course he did. He wanted the crowd. He wanted the theater of it. He came at her big and slow and confident, a wide swing of one massive arm, not even a real strike, a swat, the kind of blow you use to knock a thing aside, not to kill it. He wanted to send her tumbling across the floor. He wanted her humiliated, not hurt. That was the whole plan you could read on his face. Bat the little human off her feet, let her lie there stunned, laugh, collect the certification, go home. His arm came around. And she wasn't there. I don't mean she flinched. I don't mean she stumbled back. I mean that between the start of his swing and the end of it, she had simply stepped inside it, under it, so close to him that his arm passed through the air where her head had been a quarter second before. She moved the way water moves around a stone. No wasted motion. No panic. She read the swing before it finished and she was already gone. The crowd's laughter caught in its throat. 100 fighters who had spent their lives around violence, and they all felt it at the same instant. That little wrong note flip in the stomach when the thing you're watching stops being the thing you expected. Drieg felt it too. His grin flickered. He turned to find her and she was against his flank now, tucked in tight where his four arms couldn't easily reach, and she was already moving. The little metal bar came up. She didn't swing it at his head. That's what I would have done if I were an idiot with a club and a giant enemy. Go for the head. She didn't. She drove the end of it, hard, into a specific point on the side of his knee joint, into the soft seam of hide where the plating met, the one weak line in all that armor, the one place a Kruggan can be hurt. I heard the sound. Everyone heard the sound. A wet, meaty crack that carried up through the whole silent arena. Drieg's leg buckled. He roared surprise more than pain at first, and he swung again, wild now, all four arms trying to catch her, trying to grab this small thing that had gotten inside his reach. But she was already flowing to his other side, ducking under, and the bar came down again. Same place, the other knee, that same terrible seam, that same crack. Both his legs went. A Kruggan is not built to be brought down to their level. Their whole way of fighting depends on being the biggest thing in the room. Take their legs and you take their world. Dreeg dropped, not fell, dropped, his own weight slamming him down onto the plating so hard the floor rang like a bell. And the girl was on him before he landed. She rode him down. That's the only way I can describe it. As he collapsed, she was already moving with him, up onto his back, one knee planted between his shoulders, and the little metal bar was suddenly not against his knee anymore but laid crosswise against the back of his neck, at the base of his skull, at the one narrow gap in the plate where the spine runs up into the head. She pressed it there, not hard enough to break anything, just hard enough that he understood. And then she was still again. The whole arena had gone dead silent. The ticking of the cooling plates, that was the only sound. Tick, tick, tick. A giant warrior face down on the floor with a small human kneeling on his back and her weapon at the one point on his body where death lived, and she was as calm as if she were waiting for a lift. I checked later against the arena's own timing log, because I had to know. I had to see the number. From the fall of the baton to the moment her bar touched the back of his neck, 4 seconds. 4. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I have never in my life felt a silence like that one, and I have stood in a lot of silent rooms. Dreeg Vorhalik lay there. His legs weren't working. His arms were flat against the floor, palms down, and he was smart enough, even now, even like this, not to try to push himself up, because he could feel what was resting against his neck and he knew exactly what it was. The referee came forward slow, its long neck low. Yield, it said quietly, or incapacitation. Warrior Vorhalik, do you yield? For a moment Dreeg didn't answer, and I understood the moment. I really did. Everything he was, every mark burned into his chest, every boast he had made in the last hour, all of it was screaming at him to say no, to buck her off, to die rather than yield to a silent human girl in front of a crowd that had, minutes ago, been laughing along with his jokes. The girl felt him tense. She didn't hit him, she didn't press harder. She just leaned down, close to the side of his head, and she spoke. The first words she had said the entire time. Quiet, just for him, though the arena was so silent it carried anyway. Don't, she said. You're better than the way you talk. That was all. I have turned those words over 1,000 times since. You're better than the way you talk. Not a threat, not a gloat. She could have said anything. She could have humiliated him the way he'd tried to humiliate her, and the crowd would have eaten it up and no one would have blamed her. Instead, she gave him a door. She gave him a way to be more than the fool who'd mocked her. She gave it to him on purpose, and she gave it to him quietly so that only he would know it was a gift. Dreeg Vorhalik closed his eyes. I yield, he said. And the referee raised the baton, and it was over. She got off him at once. No lingering, no standing over him in triumph. She rose, stepped back, and clipped the little metal bar into place at the small of her back where it had been the whole time. She reached down, and here's a thing I'll never forget. She reached down and offered him her hand. Her small human hand, to help a Kruggan 4 times her size up off the floor. He stared at it. Everyone stared at it. And then, slowly, he took it, not to be pulled up. He was far too heavy for that, but he took it, and let her hand rest in his for a moment, and something passed between them that I couldn't hear and couldn't name. He got his ruined legs under him and he stood, swaying, leaning on nothing, refusing to lean on anything. And then Dreeg Vorhalik, who wore his kills on his chest, who had never in his life worried about being hurt, turned to the silent arena, and in a voice that had lost every trace of its earlier ease, he said, "The challenger is certified. I have never fought better." He wasn't talking about himself. Everyone understood that. I have never fought better. He meant she was the best he had ever faced. It was the highest thing a Kruggan can say, and he said it about the girl he had called a mistake on a form. That's when the arena finally broke. You'd think they'd have been angry, their champion humbled. their laughter thrown back in their faces. I braced for it. I thought the benches would turn ugly. They didn't. They roared. Warriors are strange, like I told you. They love strength more than anything, more than their own pride. And what they had just seen was strength. Real strength, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself, the kind that had been standing quietly at the edge of the floor the whole time while a fool made noise. They came to their feet, and they made a sound I felt in my chest, in the floor plates, in my teeth. 100 fighters of a dozen species roaring for a small human girl who hadn't said more than 9 words the entire time. And she stood in the middle of it in her plain gray suit with no marks on it, and she looked not proud, not embarrassed. She looked tired. The tired of someone who has done this before and knows it doesn't change anything, not really, not the next station or the one after that. She gave the crowd a short nod, the way you'd thank someone for holding a door, and she turned and walked toward the fighter's gate. I don't know what made me do it. I am not a brave creature. But I moved along the walkway fast, cutting down the stairs, and I got to the corridor by the gate just as she came through it, and I said, stupidly, breathlessly, "How?" She stopped. She looked at me. Up close her eyes were very steady and very old for her face. "How what?" she said. "How did you didn't even," I was babbling. "You didn't say anything, the whole time. You let him, he called you a mistake, and you just stood there, and then I ran out of words. Why didn't you say anything?" And she gave me a small, tired smile, and she said the thing I have carried ever since. The thing that is the whole reason I am telling you this at all. "Because talking is how you warn people," she said. "And I didn't come here to warn him. I came here to certify." She let that sit for a second. "Where I'm from," she went on, quieter, "the loud ones are the ones who are afraid. When a human goes quiet," she tapped the little bar at the small of her back once lightly, "that's when you should worry." And then she walked away down the corridor, small and gray and unremarkable, and I stood there with my mouth open and my box of pressure seals completely forgotten, and I understood, finally, the wrong note feeling I'd had up on the walkway. I'd been watching the wrong fighter the whole time. We all had. I found out more about her later, not much. Humans keep their records tight, and the ones who travel the certification circuits keep them tighter. But I pieced together what I could, the way a clerk does, from manifests and logs and the loose talk of people who'd crossed her path before. Her name was Ansel, just Ansel. No clan mark, no rank showing, which for a human meant she'd chosen not to show it, not that she didn't have one. She'd come up through one of their frontier programs, the ones on the hard colonies, the Deathworld postings, the places where the humans send people to see if the places can be lived in at all. She'd been doing the certification circuit for 6 years, station to station, ring to ring, certifying so that human crews could work the dangerous contracts other species turned down. And everywhere she went, apparently, it went the same way. A local champion, a crowd, the mockery of the small, silent human, and then 4 seconds or 5 or 3, and a very quiet lesson that the champion never forgot. She never gloated. That was the thing people said about her, the thing that stuck with them. She never made it worse than it had to be. She'd take you apart with a terrible gentleness and then offer you her hand and tell you something true and quiet, and you'd spend the rest of your life half hating her and half worshiping her and mostly just glad you'd met her, because you'd learned something you couldn't have learned any other way. Dreeg vor Halleck, I heard, changed after that day. Not overnight, but he stopped wearing his kills on his chest. He started training the young ones on Hesperin, the certification hopefuls, and he was hard on them, but he was fair. And when they got cocky, when one of them started strutting and boasting and playing to the room, he'd stop the session cold and tell them, in that big voice that could fill an arena, "The most dangerous thing in the galaxy is a quiet human. I met one once. Ask me sometime, and I'll tell you how long it took her to teach me that." And when they asked how long, he'd hold up 4 fingers. And he wouldn't smile when he said it, because it wasn't a joke to him anymore. It was the truest thing he knew. I want to tell you why I think about it still. Why a supply clerk who was only there for a box of rubber rings has spent so many quiet shifts turning this over. It's not the fight. The fight was extraordinary, but I've seen fights since, and fights fade. It's the silence. Every species I know fills silence. We can't stand it. We talk to fill it. We boast to fill it. We make noise to prove we're here, to prove we matter, to warn the world that we won't go quietly. Drieg filled the whole arena with himself before that duel, and looking back I understand it wasn't strength. It was the opposite. It was a creature so unsure of himself that he had to hear the sound of his own certainty bouncing off the walls or he'd start to doubt it. And she just didn't. She had nothing to prove and nobody to warn. She'd done the math a long time ago and found that she was enough, all by herself, without a single word to hold her up. That kind of quiet isn't empty. It's the fullest thing there is. It's a creature who knows exactly what she can do and doesn't need you to know it too. We spent that whole hour laughing at what we thought was weakness, and the weakness was ours. We mistook loud for strong and quiet for scared, the way the loud and the scared always do. I finished my errand eventually, found the pressure seals in the arena stores, logged into the wrong manifest just like they said, carried the box back to the medical bay, filed the correction, a completely ordinary end to a completely ordinary task. But I walked back the long way, past the arena floor where the plates were still cooling, still ticking, tick, tick, tick. The benches were empty by then, the crowd gone. And I stood at the rail for a while and looked down at the mark on the floor where a giant had fallen in 4 seconds, and I thought about a small gray figure with old steady eyes, walking to the next station, and the next, quietly certifying that her people could survive the places nobody else would go. I never saw her again. I don't expect to. The galaxy's a big place and I'm a small part of it. But I learned something in that arena that I've never unlearned, and I'll leave you with it, because she'd want it passed on quiet, the way she did everything. The loudest one in the room is almost never the one you should watch. Watch the quiet one, the still one, the one at the edge of the floor with loose hands and steady eyes and nothing at all to prove. Because when the quiet ones stop being quiet, that's the last thing you'll ever get to notice. I told you I never expected to see her again. I meant it when I said it. The galaxy is big and I am small, and the odds of 2 paths crossing twice are the odds of 2 grains of dust meeting in the same beam of light. But I did see her again. That's why there's more to tell. It took 8 years. A lot happened to me in those 8 years, and most of it doesn't matter to this story, so I'll skip it. The short version is that I stopped being a supply clerk 3rd grade on Hesperin Station. Not because I got ambitious, because I got restless. After that day in the calibration ring, something in me wouldn't sit still anymore. I'd file a manifest and my mind would drift back to a small gray figure walking down a corridor, and I'd think, there's a whole galaxy out there and you're counting rubber rings. So I put in for transfers, kept moving outward toward the frontier, toward the hard postings, the way you drift toward a sound you can't stop hearing. I told myself it was for the pay. The frontier pays better. That was true, but it wasn't the reason and I knew it wasn't. I ended up on a survey outpost called Thren's Reach, which is about as far out as you can go and still call yourself part of civilization. Past it, there's just the dark and the death worlds and the contracts that get people killed. Thren's Reach was a way station for all of that. Ships came in ragged and went out worse. It was cold and it was ugly and I liked it more than anywhere I'd ever been, because things out there were real in a way they never were on the big central stations. Nobody boasted on Thren's Reach. There was no crowd to boast to. Everybody there had already seen enough to know better. I ran cargo logistics. Bigger job, same bones, I still counted things. I just counted more dangerous things now. Reactor cores, pressure hulls, the specialized gear that human crews needed for the contracts nobody else would take. Because that was the other thing about the frontier. Out there, you finally understood what humans were for. Let me explain, because I didn't understand it myself until I lived out there. On the central stations, humans were a curiosity, a story you half believed, tough. Strange, doesn't know when to quit, but it was abstract. You'd see one working a menial job and you'd think, that's the species from the stories, and then you'd forget about it. On the frontier, it wasn't abstract. On the frontier, the death worlds were real, right there, hanging in the dark past the outpost, and somebody had to work them. The mineral worlds where the gravity crushed most species flat. The plague worlds where the air itself carried things that ate other species alive. The high radiation belts, the tidal-locked furnaces, the worlds that were one endless storm. And it was always humans who went. Not because they were expendable. That's the ugly thing other species used to say, and it's wrong. They went because they could. Because a human body, that soft, small, unremarkable thing, was the toughest general-purpose survival machine anyone had ever measured. They could take radiation that would sterilize a Krugan. They could work in heat that would drop a Sethari in minutes. They could go without water longer, without food longer, without sleep longer, and they could keep going after injuries that any sensible species would treat as the end. And they didn't complain about it. That was the part that unsettled everyone. A human crew would take a contract on a world that had killed 3 previous crews, and they'd go in quiet, and they'd get it done, and they'd come out quiet, and they wouldn't make a single boast about it. They'd just log the completion and ask what was next. I processed their gear. I signed off their manifests, and every time a human crew came through Thren's reach, I found myself watching them, looking for her in every gray suit, knowing it was foolish, doing it anyway. The trouble started with a Krugan warlord named Kesh Undravel. Now you have to understand what the frontier was like in those years. Out past the outposts, past the reach of any council, the law got thin. And where law gets thin, strong creatures make their own. Kesh Undravel had made himself into a warlord the old way, a fleet of raider ships, 100 fighters who feared him, and a simple business model. He'd find a contract crew working a valuable world, and he'd take it from them. The mineral rights, the equipment, the refined product. Whatever they'd bled for, he'd take, because he was bigger and there was no one out there to stop him. He'd been doing it for a while, mostly to Sethari crews and Draymond crews like mine, crews that would give up their cargo rather than die for it, because that's the sensible thing to do. You can always mine more ore. You can't grow back your life. And then one cycle, Kesh Undravel made a mistake. He hit a human crew. I know exactly how it went because the survivors came through Thren's reach afterward, and I processed their damage claims, and I heard the story a dozen times from a dozen shaking mouths. The crew had been working a world called Varix Deep, a crushing gravity mineral world, the kind only humans could work. They'd been there for months. They'd bled for that ore. Literally, 3 of them had died in accidents pulling it out of the ground, and the survivors had kept working, kept going, quiet the way they always were. And when their hold was finally full and they came up out of that gravity, well half dead with exhaustion, Kesh Undravel's raiders were waiting for them in orbit. The warlord's demand was the usual: surrender the cargo, surrender the ship, walk away with your lives and be grateful. The human captain, a woman named Das, I'd meet her later, refused. Kesh laughed. I'm told he actually laughed on the open channel, the way Drieg had laughed in the arena all those years ago, that same big, confident amusement at the small thing that didn't know its place. He told her she had 1 minute to reconsider. He told her that if she made him board that ship, he'd space her whole crew, and it would be a shame, because everyone knew humans were such hard workers. And Captain Das said, and this got repeated so many times on the frontier that it became a kind of proverb, she said, we buried 3 of ours in that ground. You want the ore, you can dig them up and ask them for it. Then she cut the channel. The boarding action lasted 11 minutes. Kesh Undravel sent 40 fighters onto that human ship. 40. Against a survey crew of maybe 15, exhausted, half-starved, unarmored, armed with mining tools and whatever they could grab. 11 minutes later, 6 of Kesh's fighters made it back to the raider ships. 6 out of 40. And they were not in fighting condition. They were in the condition you're in when you've spent 11 minutes in a dark cargo hold with humans who have just watched their friends die and have decided that they are done losing things to you. Kesh Undravel broke off. He had to. He'd lost most of a boarding party and gained nothing. He pulled his fleet back into the dark, and the human crew limped their wounded ship to Thren's Reach, and that's where I came into it, because somebody had to log the damage and process the dead. I remember Captain Da standing at my counter. She had a broken arm she hadn't set yet. She had someone else's blood dried across half her face. And she was calm, that terrible human calm, the calm I'd seen once before in an arena as she read off the manifest of what she'd lost. 3 from the gravity world, 4 more from the boarding, 7 of 15, nearly half her crew gone. She read it off without her voice breaking, and when she got to the end she looked at me and she said, quiet. He'll come back, his kind always does, he can't let it stand. A pause. You should get word out, tell the crews. Tell them Kesh Undravel is going to want to make an example and he's going to want to make it big so nobody else gets the idea that he can be refused. She was right, that's exactly what he did. The word came in maybe 20 cycles later. Kesh Undravel had put out a challenge on every Frontier channel, open, unencrypted, meant to be heard by everyone. He was coming to Thren's Reach. Not to raid it, to hold court the way his kind always did. He was going to bring his whole fleet, and he was going to dock at our outpost, and he was going to issue a formal challenge, a duel, warriors' rules on neutral ground to any human who had the courage to answer for what their species had done to his fighters at Varric's Deep. And when he won that duel, as he surely would, he was going to take it as proof, in front of the whole frontier, that humans were not so tough after all, that they could be beaten, that they could be ruled. And here's the thing about a warlord's challenge on the frontier. You can't just ignore it. Thren's Reach was neutral ground, technically, but neutral ground only stays neutral as long as everyone agrees to pretend. If we refused to host the challenge, Kesh had made it very clear he'd stop being polite about the whole neutral outpost concept. He had a fleet. We had a docking ring and a lot of nervous clerks. So the outpost administrator, a Sethari named Vel, decent enough, in over their head agreed to host it. And word went out across the frontier that on such and such a cycle, Kesh Undravel would fight any human who dared. And everyone who could get to Thren's Reach in time started coming, because warriors love a spectacle, and this was going to be the biggest one the frontier had seen in years. I watched them come in. Kruggan raiders mostly, Kesh's own people and the hangers on that a strong warlord attracts, but others too. Sethari curious, Drayman frightened but unable to look away. And in ones and twos, human crews, the ones working the nearby contracts, drifting in quiet, saying nothing, watching everything. The whole outpost filled up with the smell of too many bodies and too much anticipation. And underneath it, that same wrong note feeling I'd had 8 years before, up on a walkway, watching a big fool circle a small silent girl. I couldn't shake the thought. He doesn't know. None of them know. They think they're going to watch a human get taught a lesson. They have no idea what a human is. They set up the challenge floor in the main cargo bay because it was the only space big enough. Cleared out the crates, ringed it with whatever people could stand on. It was nothing like the polished calibration ring on Hesperin. It was a working cargo bay, grease-stained deck plates, the cold coming up through your feet, the big bay doors sealed against the dark outside. But the crowd made it an arena anyway. Crowds always do. Kesh Undravel came in like he owned it. He was bigger than Dreeg had been. That was my first thought, and it was not a comforting one. Where Drieg had been a show-off, a peacock, all polish and swagger, Kesh was something harder, older. His plating was scarred and dull, no grooming, no vanity. He didn't wear his kills on his chest because he didn't need to. You could see them in the way he moved. This was a creature who had actually done the things Drieg had only bragged about. This was the real thing. He walked to the center of the floor and he didn't boast, not the way Drieg had. He just stood there, huge and still, and let the crowd feel him. And then he spoke and his voice was quiet, which was somehow worse. I lost 34 fighters at Variks Deep, he said. Good fighters to a crew of miners. He let that sit. I am not here to pretend that didn't happen. It happened. Humans are dangerous in a dark hold in a fair fight with numbers and desperation. I know that now. I paid to learn it. He turned slowly, taking in the crowd, and there was something almost reasonable in his tone, which made my hide crawl. But dangerous is not the same as strong, he went on. A cornered animal is dangerous. That does not make it my equal, so I am here to settle the question the honest way. One human, one Kruggan, warrior's rules. No dark hold, no numbers, no desperation. Just skill against skill in the light where everyone can see. He spread his forearms. If a human can beat me here on a clean floor, I will leave this frontier and never take another human cargo. You have my word and my word is known. And if I win, the quiet got quieter, then everyone here goes home understanding what I understand, that the human is a tool, not a warrior, useful for the death worlds, nothing more. Something to be owned and pointed at hard work like any other machine. He lowered his arms. So, which of you soft little things is going to answer for Variks Deep? The silence stretched. And I want you to understand, this was a real question with real stakes and no easy answer, because Kesh was not Drieg. Drieg had been a fool, and fools can be beaten by anyone who isn't. But Kesh Undravel was the real article. Even I could see it. Whoever stepped onto that floor was not walking into a certification bout. They were walking into a fight with a creature who had killed more warriors than most of us had ever met, and who was, for once, not underestimating anyone. The human crews stood at the edge of the floor, quiet, still, and none of them moved. And I felt my heart sinking because I thought, after everything, after Variks Deep, after all of it, I thought maybe this was the fight humans couldn't win. Maybe Kesh was right. Maybe there was a level of warrior above which even human toughness didn't matter, and he was that level, and we were all about to watch it proven. Then someone stepped onto the floor. And it was her. 8 years older. Same plain gray suit. Same short practical hair, gray coming into it now at the temples. Same stillness, that stillness I'd never forgotten, the one I'd mistaken once for fear and would never mistake for anything again. Ansel. She walked to the center of the floor with those same calm steps, and she stopped a respectful distance from Kesh Undravel, and she looked up at him with those old steady eyes, and I stood at the edge of the crowd with my whole chest gone tight, thinking, no, not him. He's not Drieg. He's real. Please, not him. Kesh looked down at her, and to his credit, because he was smarter than Drieg had ever been, he didn't laugh. You, he said, studying her, you've done this before. I can see it. You've got the quiet. He tilted his head. How many warriors have you certified human? She didn't answer. Of course she didn't. I could have told him she wouldn't. Ah, Kesh said softly, the silent kind. I've heard about you ones, the circuit fighters. Something flickered across his scarred face, not fear. He was past fear, but a kind of grim recognition. The stories say you're something to see. He rolled his 4 shoulders, settling into his weight, and for the first time all cycle he looked, not amused, but ready. Good. I was worried they'd send me a miner. Let's find out if the stories are true. The outpost administrator, poor Vel, stepped forward with a shaking neck and recited the rules. Warriors' rules. First to yield, first to incapacitation. Weapons permitted. Kesh drew a weapon this time. Not out of respect for her exactly, out of respect for the situation. A Kruggan war blade, curved as long as Ansel was tall, the metal dark and hungry. He'd underestimated nobody. He was going to end this properly. Vel turned to Ansel, "Challenger weapons." And Ansel reached to the small of her back unhurried the way she had 8 years before and drew out the same short bar of dull metal, or one like it, plain, no edge, no glow, the length of her forearm. Against a war blade. The crowd made a sound, not laughter this time. They knew better by now. Varric's Deep had taught the whole frontier not to laugh at humans. But it was a low, uneasy murmur, the sound of 100 creatures thinking the same thing. That's not enough. Whatever she is, that's not enough against that blade in those hands. I thought it too. I'll be honest. 8 years of believing in her and standing there in that cold cargo bay, looking at that curved blade, even I thought, this is the one she loses. She set her feet, she held the little bar low, and she breathed. Vel raised a trembling hand to start it and dropped it, and got out of the way fast. Kesh did not rush her. That was the difference, the whole difference, and it made my blood run cold. Dreeg had come in big and slow and sloppy, wanting the theater. Kesh came in correctly. He didn't swing wild. He moved in behind the blade, controlled, patient, giving her nothing, closing the distance a careful step at a time, keeping that long reach between them, forcing her to come to him. Ansel didn't come to him. She circled, slow, reading. Her eyes never left him and her feet never crossed, and she gave nothing away either. 2 quiet fighters feeling each other out, and the whole cargo bay so silent you could hear the hull ticking in the cold. Kesh tested her. A short probing thrust, fast, not committed, the kind of strike meant to see how she'd react, to draw out her habits. She slid away from it without seeming to move much at all, and she didn't counter, didn't take the bait, didn't show him anything. He grunted, almost approving. He tried again, a real cut this time, the blade coming across in a flat, hissing arc that would have opened her from shoulder to hip. And she wasn't there for that one either. She'd read the shift in his weight before the blade even moved, and she flowed under it. But this time, she was already inside, and the little bar licked out and cracked against his blade arm, at the wrist joint at a seam. It wasn't a finishing blow. He was too good, too fast, he was already pulling back, and all she got was the wrist, not the knee, not anything that would drop him. But I saw his hand spasm. I saw the blade dip just slightly, for just a moment. And I understood what she was doing. She wasn't trying to end it in one move, the way she had with Dreeg. She couldn't. He was too good for that. So she was doing it the slow way, the patient way. She was going to take him apart one seam at a time, one small perfect strike at a time, and there was nothing he could do to stop her from getting inside, because getting inside was the one thing humans were built for. Kesh understood it too. I saw the understanding land on his scarred face, and to his enormous credit, he didn't panic. He adjusted. He stopped trying to keep her at range. He'd seen that range didn't help him, and instead he committed to overwhelming her, 4 arms and a blade and all that mass. A storm of steel and muscle meant to simply bury her under more than any small thing could handle. For about 6 seconds the cargo bay was full of the sound of it, the hiss of the blade, the scuff of feet on grease-stained plate, and under it, sharp and regular, the crack, crack, crack of a little metal bar finding seam after seam after seam. She took a cut. I saw it, a line of red open across her shoulder where the blade clipped her, and the crowd gasped and my heart stopped. But she didn't stop. She didn't even seem to notice. That's the human thing, the thing Kesh had heard about and hadn't fully believed until that moment. You could hurt them. You could absolutely hurt them, and it just didn't matter. It didn't slow them. They'd registered the damage and filed it and kept coming with those same steady eyes. And Kesh Undravel, veteran of 100 fights, the real article, the hardest warrior I ever saw, Kesh started slowly to come apart. The wrist first. Then a knee, not shattered like Dreeg's. He was protecting them, but bruised, weakened, wrong. Then the other wrist. Then a hip. She was mapping him. finding every seam in that scarred old plating and putting a mark on it, patient as a clerk filling a manifest. And with every mark he got a little slower and she got a little more inside and the end got a little closer. It didn't take 4 seconds. This wasn't Drieg. It took closer to 40. 40 seconds of the hardest, tightest, most beautiful and terrible thing I have ever watched. A small gray human and a huge scarred warlord. And slowly, the impossible becoming inevitable. At the end, his blade arm wouldn't grip anymore. The war blade rang on the deck plates. And Ansel was inside his guard one final time, and she didn't put the bar to his throat. She put her hand flat against his chest, over the heart, and she pushed, using his own ruined balance against him, and Kesh Undravel, warlord of the frontier, went down onto the cold plates of a cargo bay on Thren's Reach. And she stood over him, bleeding from the shoulder, breathing hard finally for the first time, and she still didn't gloat. Vel had to be prompted twice before the poor Sethari remembered to speak. Yield, Vel managed, or incapacitation. Warlord Kesh Undravel, do you? I yield, Kesh said. He said it fast, no hesitation, and that told me something about him, something that separated him from Drieg after all in the other direction. Drieg had wanted to die rather than yield, because his whole self was wrapped up in never being beaten. Kesh yielded instantly, because Kesh was a real warrior, and a real warrior knows exactly when he has lost and wastes no time pretending otherwise. He lay there for a moment looking up at her, and then he laughed, not the confident laugh from before, a different one, low and rough and something almost like relief in it. The stories were true, he said. They didn't do you justice, but they were true. He worked himself up onto one elbow, wincing at all the seams she'd marked. 40 years I've fought. I've never been read like that. You knew what I was going to do before I did. Ansel looked down at him. And she spoke, the second time I ever heard her voice, 8 years after the first, and it was rougher now, older, but it was the same quiet. You fought clean, she said. At the end, you could have kept using the numbers, the raids, the dark holds. You came out into the light instead and fought me straight. A pause. That took more courage than the fighting did. I want you to know I saw it. Kesh went still. Because it was the same thing, wasn't it, the same gift she'd given Drieg all those years ago, the door, the quiet true thing that let a beaten warrior be more than just beaten. You're better than the way you talk, she'd told a fool. And now, to a warlord, you fought clean and that took courage and I saw it. She reached down. Her small human hand, bleeding, offered to a warlord 4 times her size. And Kesh Undravel took it and let it rest in his for a moment, and something passed between them that I couldn't hear and couldn't name. The same something I'd seen once before in an arena, the thing that passes between 2 people when one has beaten the other so completely, and so gently that beating turns into something more like understanding. He kept his word. That was the thing about Kesh. His word really was known, and he really did keep it. He got up off those plates, and he turned to the crowd, to his own raiders and the frontier crews and everyone who'd come to see a human get taught a lesson. And in that quiet, hard voice he said, "You heard my terms, I keep them. No Kruggan under my banner takes another human cargo, not on this frontier, not anywhere I hold. And if I hear that any of you have..." He swept the crowd with a look that reminded everyone, beaten or not, exactly what he was. "You'll answer to me. Because I have just learned something, and I'll not have my own people staying stupid when I've paid this much to get smart." And then he did a thing that no one expected. He turned back to Ansel, and he lowered his head, a Kruggan gesture, the deep bow they give only to those they consider above them, a thing Kesh Undravel had almost certainly never done in his life, and he held it there a long moment in front of everyone. The crowd lost its mind. Same as Hesperin, 8 years before, only bigger, wilder, the whole cold cargo bay roaring, warriors of every species on their feet, because they had come to see strength proven and they had seen it, just not the strength they expected. They roared for a bleeding gray human who hadn't said 40 words the whole cycle. And she stood in the middle of it looking tired. That same tired. The tired of someone who's done this before and knows it changes less than the crowd thinks. She gave them a short nod, and she pressed a hand to the cut on her shoulder, and she turned to leave. This time I didn't hesitate. I pushed through the crowd and I got to her before she reached the cruise side of the bay, and I said, and my voice was shaking, 8 years of waiting in it. You won't remember me. She stopped. She looked at me. Those old steady eyes moved over my face and I watched them change just slightly, a flicker of something. Hesperin, she said, the calibration ring, you had a box, a ghost of a smile, pressure seals. I couldn't speak for a second. She remembered. Out of 8 years and 100 stations and every warrior she'd ever put on the floor, she remembered a supply clerk and his box of rubber rings. You never told me your name, I managed. That day, I found it out later, Ansel, but you never told me. No, she agreed. I didn't. Why do you do it? It came out of me all at once, the thing I'd carried for 8 years. Station to station, warlord to warlord, you get cut, you bleed, you could work anywhere, do anything, and you keep walking onto these floors against these. Why? What's it for? She was quiet for a moment. Behind her, the crowd still roared. In front of her, a shaking drayman clerk who'd rearranged his whole life around a thing he'd seen her do once. And then she told me. The thing that finished what she'd started teaching me 8 years before, in a corridor, with the pressure seals forgotten in my head. Because somebody has to keep answering the question, she said. They keep asking it. Every station, every frontier, some big strong thing stands up and asks it, are the humans really strong? Or are they just tough, just useful, just tools you can point at the hard work and own? Her voice was very steady. And if nobody answers it, the answer becomes tool. And then they start pointing us at the hard work and forgetting to ask whether we want to go. You've seen the death worlds. You know what they'd do with us if they decided we were machines. She touched the bleeding cut on her shoulder, almost absently. So I answer it, she said, over and over, as many times as they ask. I walk onto the floor and I let them see, not so they'll fear us. She shook her head. I don't want them afraid. Fear doesn't last and it turns to hate. I want them to respect us. There's a difference. You can own a thing you fear. You can't own a thing you respect. She looked at me, and there was something almost gentle in it. That's why I offer them my hand at the end, she said. Every time, that's the whole point. Anybody can knock a warrior down, that just makes you a bigger threat. But you knock them down and then you lift them up and tell them something true. She nodded back toward Kesh, who was still watching us across the bay, and now you're not a threat. Now you're something they'd stand beside instead of something they'd point at the dark. That's the win. The fight was never the win. The hand was always the win. I have thought about that every single day since. The fight was never the win. The hand was always the win. She left Threns reach that cycle. Went out on the next human contract, quiet, unremarkable gray suit and steady eyes, off to the next station and the next floor and the next big strong thing that would stand up and ask the question. I never saw her again after that. I still don't expect to. Twice was already more than the galaxy owed me. But I stayed on the frontier a long time after and I watched what her answer did, because it did do something. Kesh Undravel kept his word, and more than kept it, he became, of all things, a kind of guardian of the human crews on his frontier. And when other warlords came sniffing around human cargo, he explained the situation to them, personally, in the language warlords understand. The raids stopped, not because anyone was afraid. Because a warlord who was respected had decided that humans were to be respected, and respect, it turns out, spreads. And the crews kept working the death worlds, quiet, unremarkable, doing the thing nobody else could do in the places nobody else would go. But they worked them as partners now, on the frontier, not as tools, because somewhere along the line, station by station and floor by floor, One small gray woman had walked out in front of 100 crowds and answered the question until the answer stuck. I'm old now telling you this. I went back to logistics in the end, still count things, it's what I'm for. But I count them on the frontier, among the human crews, and every time one of them comes through my station quiet and tired and unremarkable, I think about a little metal bar and a curved war blade and 40 seconds in a cold cargo bay, and I think, you have no idea what you're looking at. None of you ever do. And that's all right. That's how she'd want it. She never needed you to know. That was the whole point. The quiet ones never do.